Let's stand for prayer. Stand for prayer, please. Okay, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, everywhere present and filling all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O gracious one. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory to God.
Okay, so we are starting off with chapter 8 here, and this is his second vision, and this has to do, a reminder about the microphone. If you kind of sit close to Steve as the moderator of the microphone there, and so if you need to ask a question, make a comment, then grab the microphone from them, okay? You too, Karen, we'll wait for you to come up here. So keep that in mind. Do we have questions or comments from last class? None? Good. Let's. Okay. So chapter 8. We're going to talk about chapter 8 is the second vision in this group of chapters here. It's the second vision about the ram and the goat. So Daniel's vision sees himself in an area of what in the Bible is called Elam, which is in Persia. And it's in the capital city of Susa. Now, he sees himself there, which means he's not actually there. That's just part of the dream. This is also familiar with what we saw with Ezekiel. Those that were with me with Ezekiel, do you remember about his visions? And Jerusalem, Babylon, Jerusalem, we weren't really sure. He was a little bit more vague about where he was, whether he was actually transported there by God or whether it was just part of his vision. But here, Daniel's more specific, saying he sees himself there. All right? And he sees a ram with two horns, and one horn is for the Medes, and the other one is for Persia. And one is longer than the other, and the longer one is probably for Persia. So that's the ram with two horns. But now you get to the goat, and the goat seems to be very strong, and he's coming from the west. Is there any significance to that? The west, maybe not. Yes. Yeah. In general, we talk about. well, maybe.
Would you say that again? I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
Well, no, just repeat it, Steve. Well, I'll repeat it. She says that evil comes from the west. That's a general statement, so to speak. That evil's in the west, and we have Christ and God in the east. In the baptism, we had a baptism last night. It should have been. It was very beautiful. And what did they do in the very beginning of the baptism? Yes.
The people face west and reject everything that's evil.
That's Satan. Yes, Satan and evil. We turn west and we face that way. And our altars, for most of our churches, face east. Or they're in the eastern part of the church, so when the priest is praying, he's facing east. And so then after they renounce Satan, they turn to the east and profess their commitment to Christ by facing east. So, any event, the goat is very strong, comes in from the west, and he has a horn between his eyes, not just horns anywhere, but between his eyes. That's usually of a symbol of a vision or a visionary. Okay, and this goat symbolizes Alexander the Great. Now the goat starts running really fast. He's tearing through the land, and so the goat then rams the ram. Okay, and defeats the ram. And this goat then becomes very strong. Basically, we have Alexander the Great defeating the Medes and Persia. Okay, that's what all that symbolizes. So he conquered them. Alexander did, but then his horn was broken, which is an indication that Alexander died. Now this broken horn then becomes replaced with 4 other horns. And what does this resemble? We've talked about this actually before. What do the 4 horns from Alexander mean? Roughly, or 4 regions. More specifically, it has to do with the generals dividing up the land. So whatever Alexander had at that point, land, countries, nations, it got divided up by the four generals when he died. That's what the four horns are about. And then, out of one of these four horns comes another horn. And does anybody know who that represents? We mentioned this before. You remember, I think this is from chapter 7, actually. Remember when there, yeah. Yes, yep. Yeah, you can say it again, louder. Yep.
That horn represents Antiochus.
Yeah, Antiochus the Fourth. And so, and that has to do with Antiochus expanding the empire and actually going into Jerusalem, into Israel. And this actually kind of picks up where we left off in chapter 7. All right, so we're continuing on with this. And that horn that symbolizes Antiochus represents his assault on Jerusalem, on Israel. And it's about how Antiochus went against God in attacking the temple, fighting the faithful people, which are the people of Israel. Those are the faithful ones to God the Most High. He also went against the Most High God and committed sacrilege in the temple. So these are all evil things that Antiochus did. And so there's, he's the one that came in, and he committed a lot of abuses. A lot of killing. He abused the people very much. He's all in for himself and whatever riches he could get out of it. Yeah.
Dick, Jim, I just can't remember where was Antiochus from? Was he from Greece? Was he from the West?
I think he is the one from Syria.
From Syria.
Yeah, because he's part of the Seleucid dynasty. Is it right, Leon? I got that? Yep. Okay. Cool. My memory's fading. He's younger. He's got a better memory than I do.
I know he does.
All right. That's enough. Okay. So he's part of the Seleucid Empire, which is out of Syria, and the Ptolemies, they came out of Egypt. So those were the two dynasties that came in and started to afflict things. Okay. So you can see that being in Syria, his empire may not have included Israel. So but then he decided to expand that and go into, because Syria is like northeast, east of Israel, somewhere around there. Okay. So he goes against the host of heaven, it says. Now the host could represent heavenly bodies, which a lot of times it does, but it can also talk about human beings. And in this case, we have a convergence of the heavenly host, angels, and the humans, because he went against the faithful people of God. So, and by attacking God, he's attacking the angels, so to speak, because in every nation had a God that protected it back in those days. So if you went to war against a country, you went to war against that country's God or gods. This is all a pagan system here we're talking about. So if he goes against the Most High, then he's also gone against Michael the Archangel, because he was the guardian of the Israelites. He is the Prince of Hosts. And Antiochus committed a grave sacrilege in the temple by doing what? Does anybody remember? We actually talked about this before. What did he do in the temple?
Well, he did put a statue of Zeus in there, I remember.
Yeah, that's what he did.
Amongst other things.
No, he did all kinds of stuff to it. But the main thing, he put Zeus in and started making offerings to Zeus, who was a pagan god in the temple of Israel. Then Daniel moves on to the point of talking about a heavenly one spoke to another heavenly one. Now this kind of jargon usually refers to a heavenly court. So you got a judicial system, so to speak, and this is a reference to that. And what these holy ones were talking about was, how long will this last? How long is this insurrection, or not insurrection, but this battle, this fight, this sacrilege, this abuses of the Israel people? How long is that going to go on? Now, that statement is also a common jargon in apocalyptic literature. And as we know, Daniel is considered apocalyptic. And this is one of the reasons, because we see liturgy like that. Now, this heavenly court reveals to Daniel what's going to happen. There's going to be a period of time when the evil doings of Antiochus IV will come to an end. Now, do they give him a time frame? No, not really. No, it doesn't give him a time frame about when it's going to happen. And that's a very typical thing of apocalyptic. You know, it's something that's going to come, but we're not going to reveal. And we're going to find out why in a minute. And now, in this way, Daniel's actually, even though he doesn't know when, he's like, got this word now that there will be an end. And so what is he doing to the Israelites? What is he providing to them? Hope. Yeah, he's giving them hope. That's another theme of Daniel is the idea of giving hope, of showing faith to the people of Israel. Because what you're doing, if you don't know when it's going to end, that means you have to trust God. You have to have some faith in God that it is going to happen. And then if you do that, then now you have the hope that it's going to happen based on your faith. You see how they work together? So, and that's what Daniel's doing for the Israelites. He's providing this for them. And so that takes up that's the first half of chapter 8. Now we move into where it starts in, I think, verse 15, the interpretation by Gabriel.
Who is Gabriel?
An angel.
That's what I thought. I
Yeah.
didn't want to ask.
Well, it's probably new to you because this is the first time Gabriel's name is brought up in the Bible. So, but it's the same Gabriel that did the Annunciation. It's an angel. And why do we call Gabriel an angel? Angels are, in general, messengers. They're messengers. Now, some of them have a little bit more duties, like Michael. He's the one that leads the army for battle. So he's involved in the holy wars, so to speak. And so, you know, other angels have different jobs and things like that. So, but in general, an angel is a messenger, especially when it comes to appear to a human. Because Daniel doesn't really understand the vision. He's having problems comprehending this. So, so the angel Gabriel comes, and like I said, this is the first time he shows up by name in the Bible. And you look at his name, it means man of God. And you remember we talked about names, and if you think about the spelling of Gabriel, it ends in E-L. And remember we talked about E-L is a reference to God. And so his name, Gabriel, means man of God. Okay. And his message, the reason why he's an angel, because he's going to bring a message from God about what God's purpose is, or what he wants the people to know. Okay. And he appears to Daniel as a man, probably to make this easier for Daniel to handle this appearance, okay? So then there's a statement that Gabriel makes to Daniel, which we'll just read out from the Bible. This is in, what chapter are we in? 8, verse 17. Let's see. So he came near where I stood. And when he came, I became frightened and fell prostrate. Okay? But he said to me, understand, O mortal, which is referring to him as a man, that the vision is for the time of the end. Very important statement. One time, real just nonchalant. It's the time for the end. Meaning, I stole your question? No.
Well, in this Bible here that I'm looking at, it says, understand, O Son of Man,
Right.
that the vision is for the time of the end. And that Son of Man comes up, I don't know how many times.
Mm-hmm. And Jesus refers to him as the Son of Man. So the Son of Man can refer to God, can refer to Jesus, or it can actually refer to a man, a mortal. That's why the mortal gets translated, because it depends on your translation. So that's the RSV. This is the new RSV. And so they changed it. Well, you said mortal, didn't you?
O Son of Man.
Oh, no, you said O Son of Man, right. Yeah. And in a footnote, they talk about it being Son of Man. So it can be used for either one. But he's talking to Daniel, and we know that Daniel is a man. He's a prophet. So it's not talking to Jesus or referring to Jesus. Okay, but, okay, he says that this is for the time of the end. What is that referring to? Time of the end. Second coming, eschatology, okay, it's the end times, talking about the final battle, final judgment. And that's what this message is all about. So that's the only time I think it's mentioned in this chapter. It might be in another chapter, but that's a very important point because Daniel is apocalyptic, which means he's talking about, the end. He's talking about the end times. Okay, now in eschatology it's a little bit more specific, but that's what they're talking about. And so when we talk about the final battle and final judgment, do we have anything in our liturgy referring to this? Like, let's say, the judgment, final judgment. What was that, the first? Well, the first Sunday. Was it the first? We had the final judgment. Yeah, and the final judgment. Okay, so this is reflected in our liturgy. This is why I asked Father to do this during this time, because we have certain things in our liturgy that refer to things or take into account some of the things that Daniel said. Some of those things are in there. And so that's why it's good to talk about Daniel, because we see this in some of our liturgical services. Yeah.
Not only the liturgy, but the compline that we do and and even the pre-sanctifying liturgy, all of them,
Yep.
each time, each day, there's more revelation from the Gospels about the end times, about
Sure.
doing penance and preparing. I mean, it really is very rich. So when Father encourages us to go,
Right.
it's a good encouragement because it really helps you with your life.
Yeah, it does. And because we're approaching the time when Jesus is going to give up his life for our sins. And by doing that, he opened up the gates of heaven for us, for that final judgment, so that we can actually partake in that. Before the gates were closed. But now we're able to partake in that final judgment, which is a good thing because that allows us, through the final judgment, we can get into the kingdom. Now, that means that we have certain responsibilities here in this world to make that a favorable final judgment upon us, okay? So we have to be conscious and aware of this. This is why it's good to read the Bible and to the compline and go to the services, different liturgical services, because you start to hear some of this stuff. And the more you go, the more you're going to understand it, because the more of it you can think about it and pray about it. So, so we see a lot of this in our liturgical services. But does Gabriel give him a time when this is going to happen? No, there's no time. And why? And he says that this is only for God to know. Okay. So who else said that? New Testament. Jesus. When they were asking him about the kingdom, and I think this had to do with James and John when they're going to sit. And he said, well, we don't know that. Only God knows this and knows the time and so on. So it's reserved for only God.
Is that when John asked him, can we be with you at the end or at all
Yeah.
times?
Yeah, I think that's where it's at. I'm going off the top of my head, which as I get older, that's less reliable, okay? So, but if it's important, we can look it up. But Jesus did say that at one point. So we're finding that, again, that it's based on belief that Daniel is presenting this as to give hope to Israel, because you have to have belief that this is going to happen, because you don't have any time frame. If you had a time frame, a lot of times, like for me personally, like if I'm doing something I really don't like, or it's hard and it's painful or whatever, digging a ditch or whatever, it's like I know that at 4 or 5 o'clock I get to go home. I know there's an end to this. I know when it's going to happen. It's easier for me to be able to do those things. It's very difficult to do it when you don't know what the time is. So you go into 9 o'clock at night and you're still digging the ditch. But, so that's why a lot of this is based on faith, okay? That you believe and trust in God that he's going to bring this to an end, all this suffering that they're going through. And Gabriel now goes into some of the details about the vision and the end. The vision of the animals with the horns that we just talked about in the first half, that stands as is. That's just symbolic of the different nations that are involved in this. But he goes on to talk about the period of wrath that's going to be towards the end of the time, that there's going to be a rough period at the end there. And this period of wrath is about the foreign rule and the atrocities against the holy ones. And the holy ones are who? Jews, the Hebrews, the faithful, the Israelites. And so we're talking about all the abuses and crimes committed against the people of Israel. So if we look at verse 23, so we're still in chapter 8, I believe. 23, chapter 8. Says, at the end of their rule, when the transgressions have reached their full measure. So that's what we're talking about, the end of the rule. And that has to do with the standard of transgressions that have reached their full measure. Okay, so right now, this is the thought of Antiochus, okay? And then we go on to, if we look at verse 24, at the end, he shall destroy the powerful and the people of the holy ones. People of the holy ones, like we said, are the Jews, the Israelites. So he's going to destroy the powerful and the people of the holy ones. So we're talking about Antiochus coming in there and, rape, pillage, and plunder. And he's going to sack Israel and Jerusalem particularly. But the time will come when he's going to get destroyed. And we see this in verse 25. But he shall be broken. He is Antiochus. He shall be broken, and not by human hands. So what is that a reference to? It's going to be God. Okay? So this is the wrath that God's going to bring upon Antiochus. And so, again, it's providing, a faith for the Most High, for the God of Israel. He's providing that faith for him because he's telling them, God's going to do this. We don't know when, but we know that Antiochus is going to be creating all kinds of sins, and that God's going to take care of that for them, but we're not sure when.
The Prince of Princes is God.
Where are you at?
25, verse 25. At the end, it says, without warning, he shall destroy many, he shall even rise up against the Prince of Princes.
So that should be, if I remember right, that should.
No human hand shall be broken. He shall be, and by no human hand he shall be broken.
Okay, I believe that's going to be Michael. Let me look real quick. Yeah. So the Prince of Princes, Michael, the Archangel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because that's a phrase, that's a title for Michael. And so without warning, okay, so to fill in for the rest, the question was about the Prince of Princes. So without warning, he shall destroy many and shall even rise up against Prince of Princes. This goes back to that idea, that philosophy that there's gods that protect each nation. So we're talking about Antiochus going against Israel. So that he is the one that's being referenced as he. Okay, it's Antiochus. So he will come without warning and shall destroy the people. And and by going against Israel, he's going against Michael the Archangel. So.
How long has Michael the Archangel been the
The
for
leader of
the
the-
Israelites? When did he first appear?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'd
I
have to
mean,
look
I
that
never heard that before until today, you know.
Yeah, I've heard of it before about him being the guardian of Israel. So,
Okay,
Might be the time of the 40 years in Jezreel with Joshua. It's before this. This is
Mhm.
I think he mentioned.
yeah, I think it was before this, but I don't know exactly when. So I can try and find that out. Let me.
this probably isn't relevant or anything, but we talk about the end times.
Mhm.
Of course, we talk about the coming of Christ in the east and through the sky and
Mhm.
such, and that's going to be the end times and the last judgment. But then there's end times for all of these Antiochus and Alexander the Greeks and everything else in there, the Roman Empire, the Greco-Roman Empire, and Sparta and Troy, they all got destroyed. Is that the end time for them? We each individually have our end times when we die.
But that's not what the end time means.
Yeah, well, I know, but they're saying the end times, can we, they're saying that God's gonna take care of these guys and defeat them, but that's already happened and such.
But it well, there's going to be a phrase in here, and hopefully I'll remember your question at that point. There's going to be a statement in here about how that's dealt with for us. Okay, so hopefully we'll get to that, and then I'll point that out to you. How's that?
That's fine.
Yeah, that work? Okay. All right. So,
I'm a blank slate.
well, hopefully I don't go blank. If we both go blank, I'll read right through it and forget all about it, but hopefully I won't. Okay, then he seals, I think it's verse 26. At the end it says, "As for you, seal up the vision," another apocalyptic phrase, "for it refers to many days from now." Okay, there's one indication to your question. Many days from now. But you don't know what now is, and you don't know when that now is going to come through, when it's going to be at the end. Okay?
I don't want to complicate it, but when they say that many days hence to destroy these guys, but
No. When we talk about the seal of the vision, that has to do about the end times. That's eschatological. It talks about the end times.
all right.
Okay? So that's a very complicated question, Steve. You said you weren't going to do that. So, I'm kidding you. I'm just teasing. Yeah, when you talk about the end of time. Now, they don't go the end of times in the Bible. It just says the end of times. So that phrase, end of times, or days of days, you can kind of sense it when they're talking about, the end times, when the judgment's going to come, the final battle, the final judgment, the change of the world. We're going to talk about that change in a moment. But they're talking about that. They're not talking about what's happening immediately. And that's what a lot of people think of. And that's what they thought about Jesus when he was coming. What did a lot of the Jews want from Jesus? They wanted the end times right now. They wanted the Romans gone, right? They were more interested about the material world. That's the thing. It's not about the material world where the nations and armies and kings that, inflict pain on other people and battles and things like that. It's about the kingdom, God's kingdom. It's about going to his kingdom for our reward in the kingdom, so to speak. That's what it's about. It's about God's world, not this world, the spiritual world. So when you think about the end of times, you can't think about the Persians getting killed, Alexander or Antiochus or any of them. That's not really what this is about. That's what Gabriel's trying to get across to Daniel. And that's why in a moment we're going to talk about how, I don't know if it's this chapter or the next chapter, I think. We're going to talk about, let's see, I went blank. I hate when that happens. We're going to talk about the vision not being so much about the nuts and bolts that they're talking about in chapter 9 when we get there, but it's going to be about the vision and about the kingdom come. And that's the end times. So, okay. If I say a few more words, we'll be done with the whole thing here. You can, because a lot of this is chapter 9. So I'm going to stop right there. We're going to keep going. But don't be afraid to ask. I'm just teasing you. Okay? Seal up the vision, again, is an apocalyptic phrase that's used as talking about the end times. And he says that this is to be kept quiet until then, which we don't know what then is. Daniel doesn't know. Gabriel doesn't know, because if you remember what Jesus said, He said, only the Father knows. Nobody else knows. Okay? And then Daniel ends the chapter by making a statement which kind of reflects our situation here. He still doesn't understand the vision. It's very complicated. It is hard. And that's another point here is, and it's one of the things that I do the classes, hopefully to show that it's important to read the Bible every day. It's very difficult to understand at times. At times it's very straightforward, but other times it's very difficult. And so you read the Bible, you pray about it. You know, they say read it twice. You read it once to see what the author's trying to say, if you can understand that. You read it a second time to find out what it means to you. And you find out what it means to you through prayer. So praying, and that's talking to God. You pray to God before and after, possibly, after you read the Bible. If nothing else, try to read the gospel for the day. If you go to our calendar, it's got the readings for every day. It's got a gospel reading and epistle reading. Not during the fast, it's Genesis and Proverbs. But the rest of the year, it's got a gospel reading and epistle reading. And if nothing else, go there. Or if you want to pick up a book, you can do additional readings by picking up the book of Daniel or any other book in the Bible and read that and try to understand it. And this is why we do the classes, to try to provide some understanding. Very little, because I'm not a scholar on this. You know, I'm just passing on what I've been told, so to speak, what I read. And so, but we're trying to help each other, trying to understand this better. And you have to do some of that yourself. I can't put everything into your head and you understand it. And I ask God not to do that to me because my head would explode. So, you know, but you got to put some time and effort in it as well. Okay, again, it's appropriate that we talk about Daniel during the Great Fast because here he talks about the final battle and the final judgment. The end times. The end times. Not the end of Antiochus, but the end times. All of which we have or will experience in our liturgical services, just like I mentioned earlier. Okay, questions on 8. Comments? I'm not going to ask for complaints yet. We'll have to go off the microphone for the complaints, okay? Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 9. What time is it? All right, this is about Daniel's prayer and Gabriel's response. The first few verses is about where Daniel is present, where he's at. And the setting that tells us where he's at is now this is a tight window. This is towards the end of the exile, but before Cyrus and the Persians come in. Okay, Cyrus came in at 539, and then we're looking towards the end, or maybe right at the end of the exile, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay, and Cyrus hasn't come in yet. Okay, so that's where we're looking at. So we're looking at Babylon, and when Daniel was in Babylon. But the time is very near for that exile to end, right? And he's concerned about this. Daniel becomes concerned about this in First People because he knows that it's been how long? Since the
Close to 70 years.
70 years. It's been close to 70 years. And how do we know that that's the time frame for the exile? If we go to, well, what is Daniel talking about here? Who is he referencing here? He's referencing another prophet, right? Jeremiah. So, if we go to Jeremiah, and if we look at chapter 25 and verse 11, I believe, yes, verse 11, Jeremiah 25, verse 11 says, "This whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years." Okay? Now look at what's happened here. Babylon's coming in and taking over a lot of nations. Okay? So now we have the fall of a lot of nations, and Babylon was coming in for God, right? Wasn't Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians coming in for God to point the error of the ways of the Israelites, because they were sinning. They were doing all kind of bad things to each other. Yeah, not alone to others, but also to each other. And so, I guess God got tired of it, decided to send the Babylonians in there, And they conquered all these other nations as well as Israel. But there's a time frame on this, isn't there? 70 years. Okay? And the good, yes?
How old was Daniel when we were that?
Well, it's very, yeah, when we first started this, we talked about, I don't know if you were here, when we first talked about this, we talked about the time frame and history. That Daniel is the biggest example of how you can't use it as a history book because of the time frames that we're talking about. Because we talked about Daniel being present in Babylon. Now, some commentators, some scholars talk about him being there as a young adult, and others don't really say. But you talk about him being there in the 6th century, and then you see things that are happening in the 2nd century. So it looks like there's several authors here. Okay, so it's hard to say roughly anything about Daniel. We don't have any personal data on Daniel, how old he was when anything happened. So, there's a time limit on this, 70 years. And, oh yeah, Daniel was a very good Jew. He knew the Bible, the Old Testament. He knew the Bible. And just like any good Jew or Hebrew, like Jesus, they knew the Bible, they quoted it. They had it memorized. That's how well they knew the Bible. So it's not a far-fetched thing to see that Daniel knew what Jeremy prophesied back in, what is that, the 8th century? I'd have to go back and look. We talked about Jeremy in 2 classes ago, I think. But so it's earlier on. But things have been written and or things have been passed on orally. So he knows that it's been 70, that it's supposed to be 70 years, and he knows that it's roughly been 70 years, because I'm sure somebody somewhere in the camp is keeping track of this. And by speaking of the end, sparks hope for the Israelites. Okay? He's concerned about the end. He wants to give his people hope, because they're suffering so bad. That's how much Daniel felt for his people. He wanted to provide them with some hope. Now Jeremiah goes on further after verse 11, says, "Then after 70 years are completed," and what's 70? What's that's that magic number again, right? It's got a 7 in it, so that means that we're talking about the age of completeness, or the time of completeness, which that's what they're talking about here. When this exile is going to be completed, "I will punish the king of Babylon." Wow, that's pretty interesting, no? Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about Cyrus coming in and doing what? Conquering the Babylonians in 539. Okay? And so this has already been prophesied by Jeremiah. One thing that's interesting about this, the one thing that I came to learn from the Old Testament is how God's plan is from the very beginning, going back to Genesis. And it keeps going, it keeps going. And you'll see signs of that plan interspersed here and there, just like we said looking back in Jeremiah, what he said. So you can see that the plan, that there's consistency in this plan, and that there is a plan, that God has put this all together. It's very, very interesting to see how all this plays out, okay? And it's right here. It's here for all of us to look at and read, and to try to come and understand it. So he says, "I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation," the whole nation, and the land of the Chaldeans for their iniquity, says the Lord, making the land an everlasting waste. Okay? "I will bring upon them that land, I will bring upon that land all the words that I have uttered against it," everything written in this book, which Jeremiah prophesied against all the nations. Okay? So that's what Daniel's thinking about. He's thinking about what Jeremiah had to say about the end of the exile. So he's confused about this because they're at the end. Maybe it's 6 months beforehand, or maybe a year. Maybe it's past it 6 months. Time is kind of elusive in the Bible. It's not an exact science, so to speak. It's not historical. But Daniel's starting to worry about it. So he decides to pray to God to try to find out and try to get an answer from him. And his sincerity in Daniel's prayer is found in his fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. These are all signs of a penitential approach to God. Okay, the fasting is doing it without food. The sackcloth is a garment that they wear, and it's an obvious garment. Okay, it's not very well kept and everything. It's a showing a person in a penitential way, and the ashes that are on his forehead. So he approaches God this way with much humility, which is how we should approach him when we try to pray about the Bible. Humility is a good way to pray to God and to ask for guidance in reading the Bible or any other religious book. This fasting is also a way of preparing for a visionary experience. They would fast before they would do this because they're asking for some guidance from God, words of wisdom, a vision, or whatever. It's the same thing with iconographers, a true iconographer. When they decide to write an icon, they go through a fasting period. They pray, they fast. It takes months to do an original work because, first of all, it takes layers, and you have to let it dry and stuff. But in between, they're fasting or abstaining. They're praying the whole time so that they can have words of wisdom of how to present that icon to the people. Daniel is seeking a response from God about Jeremiah's prophecy. Now, one note about this vision, even though it's not actually a vision, Daniel is seeking wisdom and understanding from God. And this is wisdom and understanding about Jeremiah's prophecy. So this is like a vision in that it is still God's message. It's still God sending a message to Daniel specifically or to the people. The message is being brought to him to reveal his divine plan or to get some kind of understanding. And again, this should be a message to us that much thought and prayer should be involved in attempting to understand Scripture, like Daniel here. So you can use him as an example of how to do this. And this is what Daniel's doing. And don't forget, he's a prophet. He's favored by God. Okay? So, and he still approaches God with this huge humility. And another thing for prayer, for Bible, like I mentioned earlier, that the book of Daniel is a very good example of the inconsistency between what Daniel says and historical sources. Okay, the times, they don't line up, or maybe even the kings at that time, things don't line up. But again, it's not a history book. It's not about looking to get more historical data. It's about understanding the Word of God. And Daniel goes on and makes a confession to the people, to God, and also for Israel. He acts as an intercessor in confessing their sins. And he's talking about all the bad things that they have done in going against God, like committing their sins against each other or people outside their faith, how they have done wrong against God, acted wickedly, rebelled, treachery, and transgressed the laws of Moses. Okay, they're still working with the law of Moses. Now notice that Daniel mentions how the Israelites ignored the prophets. Actually, a couple of times I think he brings it up, indicating that the prophets are messengers from God. So in other words, you don't want to ignore the prophets because in a way they represent God because they're bringing a message. So you shouldn't ignore them. And that they should have listened to them. And then if they had, they probably wouldn't be in this predicament. And a good example is in going against the law. And who brought the law? Who is the human that brought the law? Moses. So in a way, you can look at Moses as a prophet because he brought down a message from God to the Israelites about the law. That was the message from God. Here's what I want you to do. This is how I want you to live. Okay? And, yeah.
So is the law of Moses supposed to be the Ten Commandments, or when you go back to the book, I guess it's Exodus, where it talks about
all the 600 laws. Moses brought the Ten Commandments, but they continued on from there. Okay, like in Leviticus and things like that. So all this was, he didn't bring down the 600 rules, it was the Ten Commandments as far as I know. But then it evolved into these other laws based on, the Ten Commandments. If you look at the present day, if you look at examination of conscience that is put out by various parishes and churches, you go through the examination of conscience, they'll have the Ten Commandments, and then they got 3 or 4 pages of everything else that evolves from the Ten Commandments. The virtues and the cardinal virtues and things like that that you can sin against. And basically, it's an attempt to guide you into living a life of piety, because you can get like the Pharisees who lived by the letter of the law, and so it got to the point that by the time of Jesus that they were more concerned about the letter of the law than the spirit of the law. This expansion out of the Ten Commandments is more like the spirit of the law. In other words, live a good life and don't hurt anybody. If you love one another, actually, in my opinion, if you love one another as your brother and sister in Christ, these other things won't happen. These other bad things won't happen, because it goes against love. So, but being human and being fallible and falling down, we need other guidance, and that's what all these other laws are for, and that's why the examination of conscience is a little bit longer than the Ten Commandments. But then Daniel goes on and talks about how God is all forgiving and merciful. And we find this in the sacrament of reconciliation in confession. Daniel goes all the way back to the Jewish enslavement in Egypt to show God's love and to show his power, because he was able to liberate the Israelites out of Egypt. So, and then he ends his prayer by asking for God's mercy, because he knows that they have not been and are not now righteous. That's a key word that Daniel has used here. We're going to see it in a moment, how important that is. And Daniel's supplication is not only for the people, but for the city of Jerusalem, where the temple is, because they believe that that's where God lives. It was in Jerusalem in the temple. Okay, so that's Daniel's prayer. Now, while he's praying, in the middle of his prayer, he is approached by Gabriel. And so, what does this say about God? First of all, just that statement. Yeah, and more importantly, he knows what you're asking for before you even ask for it. He knows what's in your heart. And that's what Jesus taught us. So God knows what Daniel wants or what he's asking for before it even happens. So he sends Gabriel. Gabriel comes to give wisdom and understanding to Daniel about that 70 years that is mentioned in verse 2 of chapter 9, which again is a reference to, by Daniel, of Jeremiah's prophecy about the 70 years. Again, he's interested in this because this has approached. This is getting very close to that time for the end of the exile. And remember that this is Jeremiah's prophecy about the 70 years. It's not Daniel's. And the 70 years, this idea of numerology in the Bible is very symbolic, and the numbers can be approximations. In other words, the numbers are not exact. Okay? Where they don't have to be exact. At times they may be. It just depends on what you're looking at. But they don't have to be. So this changes, all this changes with Gabriel's explanation. In other words, this 70 years, this whole idea of 70 years changes when Gabriel starts to give wisdom to Daniel. He wants to clarify this for Daniel, saying that it is 70 weeks, not years. And this is where the confusion starts. 70, and the word weeks. And if I understand the Hebrew language, at that time, the Hebrew language is based on a system without vowels. It's all consonants. And for 70 and for the word weeks, or week, it's the same consonants. So what does that mean? That means you have to look at it in context for what it means. In order to, at least that's the way I understood it. My Yiddish leaves a lot to be desired, so I don't really know. But this is what I come to understand from the readings. So they have the same consonants. So, and also, the word week can stand for a unit of 7. There's that magic number again, numerology, the number 7, okay? But it could be 7 weeks, or it can be 7 years. And most of the scholars, at least the ones from what I read, and they even made statements to that effect, most of them accepted that they're talking about years, okay? So that leaves you with 70 sevens, or 70 times 7 in years, which equals 490 years. Okay, so that's how they got there. And this 490 years has led to a lot of theories as to what it means. One factor is when you start the clock. Well, okay, now remember, we're talking about the 70 years of exile, so that's the time frame. So when do you start the clock? Okay, another factor is when this was all written. In other words, what is known at the time. So you have various theories put forth. There's one that says that the 490 includes the 70 for the exile and the temple existence, which if you take 70 from 490, you're talking about 420 years, and that doesn't really add up. Okay, the temple didn't last that long. So that's not really, so that doesn't really work. Another theory was this can correspond to the time of Jubilee. The time of Jubilee for the Hebrews was every 50 years. And this is when everything went back to the way it was. So if you had lost some land because you owed somebody something, at the end of 50 years, that would go back to your family. And then it's kind of like the slates wiped clean. So that would happen every 50 years. And so they're talking about from the time of Jubilee to the end of time. The end times, okay? Not to the end of Antiochus. Okay. Or another idea is the exile. If you go back to the exile, starting with Israel, of Israel. Now, remember I talked about Israel can have two meanings, right? Israel can be the north and the south, or it could just be the north. Here we're talking about the north. Okay, the south would be called Judah. So you have Israel in the north they started to be conquered before the south was, okay? And so if you go back to that, in other words, if you work back from, I'm going to give you the magic number in a little bit, but I'm not going to give you that now. So if you work backwards from it, you come out in the middle of the exiles in northern Israel. Well, I guess I'm going to give it to you here. Until the death of Antiochus, which is taken in the Bible to be 164, the way I understand it. So if you go back 164 plus 490, that takes you back into the almost beginning of the northern Israel. Okay. Either way, the sevens that are involved in this does mean that that's going to be a completeness. Now, is this the message from God? Are we looking at all these numbers and years and everything from God? Is that really what we're trying to do here? Is God trying to set up a timeline, a historical history for us? I don't think so. I think the vision is more about Israel reconciling with God according to Gabriel. Okay, that's really what the message is about, at least the way I see it, and from the commentaries. The 70 weeks is a time to end transgression of evil, for example, of evil and sin. Okay, to end that transgression so that sin will be gone. To bring everlasting righteousness. Remember I said righteousness will be important here? Now we're talking about everlasting righteousness. Divine justice will rule the day. And that's, Antiochus is gone. That's the way you can look at it. Well, Antiochus is gone, so we're going to have justice, and it's going to be divine justice. But, and then we also talk, Gabriel talks about to anoint the most holy place. That is the temple in Jerusalem. And that happens in 164. But this, the idea of everlasting righteousness, where can you find everlasting righteousness? Are you going to find it in this world? Is there another world you can find it? Where? The kingdom, God's kingdom. He rules, and he's going to rule divine justice, and so you have everlasting righteousness. So when Gabriel talks about everlasting righteousness, he's possibly talking about the kingdom or the end times, which is when the kingdom will come. Okay? Because with everlasting righteousness, there's no sin. And the only place there's no sin is in the kingdom or with God. Now, I think I remember Steve's question here. Maybe you can help me. You were talking about the end times, and you're talking about Antiochus, or you're talking about the second coming. Okay. The idea is that this still holds up. That even though Antiochus is gone, the Romans are gone, the Persians are gone as far as the past, and all these other nations are gone. But this still holds up for us today because of the coming of Jesus Christ as the Messiah. So through his new world, because remember, he did away with the law and brought love as the answer in going forward. So the gospel, the word of Jesus Christ, is what carries us forward to that end time. Because we still have a lot of problems with a lot of countries and kings and whoever, creating problems. So we don't have everlasting righteousness, that's for sure. And so it's this idea of the end times and this waiting for the end times that Daniel's talking about, the end times coming, has to do, is continue on through the words of Jesus Christ.
Because of the everlasting righteousness.
Well, that's one thing, yeah. Okay. Then Gabriel, we're almost, let me see. I think I can wrap this up before we go. Gabriel then presents a detailed list of what is going to happen in the 70 weeks. You have 7 weeks, which is 49 years, is from the fall of Judah, that's southern Israel, until Zerubbabel comes into power. Zerubbabel comes back with the exiles when Cyrus let the exiles go back home. So Zerubbabel comes back. He's also in the line of David. So he comes back to be with the exiles and come back to Jerusalem. And the anointed prince is probably Zerubbabel's high priest, which is Joshua at that time. And Zerubbabel came back to do what? What was one of the things that he started? Or maybe he completed, I can't remember. But he came back to start the rebuilding of the temple. Okay. So that's all the stuff that's, these are all changes that now are taking place, which is what the Israelites were looking forward to. So in the real world, in the material world, this stuff is coming through, so to speak. Now another theory is that the anointed priest could be Cyrus, who was anointed by God to free the Israelites. But that becomes more about what's happening in the exile. Now, after the 7 weeks, we continue rebuilding for 62 weeks with the walls of Jerusalem.
May I ask
Oh,
a
yeah.
question? What was the name of the other high priest that you?
Joshua.
So it's,
Well, in this one is Joshua. There's going to be another high priest comes up later.
okay.
Yeah. So this one, this theory has to do with Zerubbabel coming back, and his high priest when he came back was Joshua.
Where are we at right now?
Chapter 9.
Yeah, and what paragraph?
We're in after verse 24.
Okay,
We're 24, 26.
okay.
Okay, so we have additional 62 weeks where the walls of Jerusalem will be built. Then Gabriel says that the anointed one is killed. Now, at this point, they're probably talking about the high priest Onias III, who was the priest when the Maccabean revolt took place and when the revolt went against Antiochus. Okay, so it's a different high priest. I didn't look up the history of Onias and the king or whoever, but from the commentaries, they're looking at a different high priest here. And that was the high priest that brought the actual end to Antiochus. So he was the high priest at that time. So there's some time, between Zerubbabel coming with Joshua to the point where Onias became the high priest. There's some time in there, yeah. Yeah, Lena.
This guy's name was Onias, right?
Onias. He was the high priest, Ananias III.
I think I read somewhere that he was related to the high priest that sentenced Jesus to crucifixion, I think, or sent him to Pilate to say.
Caiaphas?
Yeah.
Well, maybe so. I don't know. Because this is around 164, and so it's only a couple hundred years. So yeah, that could have been. I think they were really good about keeping track of generations. So that may be true. I don't know. But we're going to take Leon's word for it. I think he probably knows. And this seems to be reasonable since we know he sacked, in other words, Antiochus sacked Jerusalem and was the one that committed very serious sacrilege in the temple. So Jerusalem's being brought back to life, the temple's being brought back to life, yeah.
Another comment. So I'm just trying to make an analogy. So a high priest in those times will be like now the Pope, right? Like the equivalent analogous. Like the head of-
No, I don't think so, because the Pope will make judgments, or make decisions, I shouldn't say judgments, he'll make decisions about things to be, or if there's, what do you call it, infallible decisions. The high priest, I don't know if they made decisions like that. They would basically be the ones to be serving. So, but they were the only ones that were allowed into the Holy of Holies. So the high priest would go, and it would only be like once a year. He would go in there and perform the sacrifice. So that was the main function of the high priest. Now, of course, any question about related to religion and those things, they would probably come to him for advice and stuff like that. But he was the highest one in that regard. He was the highest priest. So I never thought about it that way. But it could be. It might be one way to look at it.
Wasn't being the high priest a rotating thing, that it would change?
It would change, yeah. And I don't know what kind of period they would go through for the change. So, but yeah, they would change. As well as the other priests, like the Levites, you know, they would be the priests that were underneath the high priest and served the other priests. So
Seems
it has to
like
do
the
with
high
their-
priest, making an analogy, would be the bishops.
Yeah, maybe so, yeah. Well, and the Pope is a bishop.
Yeah.
So it could be. That might be one way to look at it. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but the more you think about it, the more it could be. Okay, so now we accounted for 69 weeks. There's one more week left, and during this week, the first half is the recollection of the atrocities committed by Antiochus and all the grave things he did to the people, and about his death, which is in 164. And the second half just talks about that there's still more suffering to come. There's a few more interpretations that are not all that important, or I don't have a lot of detail on, but I'm not going to. If you want to know about those, let's end the class now because we're late. So we're going to stop there, and then we'll pick up on chapter 10. And so we'll do chapter 10 and 11. Let me see where we're at. Maybe 12. Yeah. So let's look at reading chapters 10 to 12 for the next meeting next week. I know we had the picnic. We'll give you 5 more minutes more. We'll give you more time for the. I'm kidding about 5 minutes. We'll give you more time for the food, for the picnic, and then we'll start the class if that's okay.
Whatever, half hour.
Well, if I was out there on the feet with the feed bag on, it'd probably be an hour. And I know we're infringing on that, but the goal was to finish this because of what Daniel says at the end. I wanted to finish that before Pascha. So, and if we don't, we can still do it the Sunday after. So, but anyways, that's the goal. I think right now we're on schedule to do that. All right. Any questions, comments? Let me turn off my mic for the complaints. You have any complaints? All right. I'd like to hear it. That was on record too.
I do have one question that's not exactly tied to this. So the temple was destroyed, and at the beginning of the book of Daniel, the golden vessels, the gold and silver vessels were taken from the temple, and the temple was destroyed. Somewhere in my head, I always had that the Ark of the Covenant was in the temple, in the Holy of Holies.
Yeah, that was still the Holy of Holies
And
until
what would,
70.
what would that have been? Just a room?
Oh, no, it's very elaborate. You
Yeah,
know,
we-
remember the video we saw of Ezekiel? He showed the temple, the rebuilding of the temple, you know, the temple. Oh, yeah, there was rooms and rooms and rooms, and it was huge. And part of it, from the way I understand it, the Wailing Wall and the West Wall, I don't know if that's one and the same, I can't remember. But that still stands, which is from the Second Temple, I believe. And then Ezekiel was all about the building of the Third Temple, which is based on the First and Second Temples. And Solomon did the first one, and then the second was done with Zerubbabel and the others. So the design of the First and Second Temple was like what do you call it, a template for the Third Temple that Ezekiel saw in his visions. When you see that one, we had a video of it, it was
You
unbelievable.
got 3 pages that you handed out with them, I think I still have them at home there.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
make a copy and bring it in, maybe, take a look at that.
So where,
And for a nominal fee, I can go through Ezekiel for you. I'm just kidding.
where would the temple curtain have been that was ripped?
That was in, probably, I have to go back and make sure, I'm going from memory, and that's always dangerous. If I remember right, it's between the Holy of Holies and the rest of the temple. So there's like one doorway for the Holy of Holies, and then you had to set one doorway and then the veil would be there. And that is where the high priest would go, through that veil and into the thing there.
Are there any remains of the first temple?
I don't, well, I think the second temple was built on part of those that were left, the foundation, maybe. I'm not really sure about that. I think, again, I'm trying to go from memory, and I'm not sure, but I think part of it was.
So some of the rocks in the base of the Wailing Wall might be part of the first temple?
Maybe so. I can't say for sure.
But after this, there is no significance of these temples anymore, correct?
Oh, correct. Well, for the Jewish people, the Jews that don't believe it. Sorry?
For Christians, like,
Yeah, not for Christians. No, none whatsoever.
which is a true religion, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, it's the church. This is Jesus' church. So, yeah, this is what he did with Peter. You know, he gave it to Peter to build and things like that. So, but yeah, no, the temples don't have any significance for the Christians. There are a set of Jews that believe in Christ as the Messiah, and they're still Jews. So I don't know how they reconcile. I don't know how they use the temple when they go to a Christian church. I don't know. Or they had their own church, probably. I didn't really look into it too much.
I think they do have their own church.
Yeah.
Kennesaw College is a group, they debate from time to time.
Oh.
Other religions.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would love to make it to one.
thanksgiving for Paul, but also for the Gentiles.
What's that?
I was saying thanksgiving for Paul,
Yeah.
apostle of the Gentiles.
Yeah, that's the one thing, you know, Jesus is all inclusive. And back then, you were either Jew or Gentile. So you got the Jews and the Gentiles, which means everybody. So. Any other questions, comments? Microphone's off, so you can go ahead with complaints. Okay. Well, everybody have a good week, and God bless you, and we'll see you on Sunday. Time to be announced.